Hi, everyone, and welcome to Resource Revolution, the resource management podcast. I'm your host, Christine Robinson. On this podcast, we will discuss the real-life experiences of people in and around the world of resource management. Today, we have Wayne Kaplan joining us. Wayne is a former office managing partner and audit practice leader at Grant Thornton. Having survived 30 years of experience in public accounting professionally, he pivoted to helping firms adopt, develop, and execute a global workforce strategy that is profitable, sustainable, and flexible. Wayne is uniquely qualified to assist clients in driving a high-performance culture that results in outstanding levels of client service and full-time employee engagement and development. Wayne, it is so great having you here with us today.
Thank you, Christine. It's a pleasure to be here and I appreciate the opportunity.
I'm excited about this conversation. We have had many conversations in the past that I know I've said to you, you know what, this could be a podcast. So here we are. So there's a couple of different things that we can cover. And what I'd really like to understand is this idea of, so the podcast is about resource management, right? And what's interesting is that resource management has manifested itself in many, many ways over the course of certainly the last several decades, and is now entering this new period, right, of I'll call it disruption, which is what's happening across the industry, across the board. I'm curious, kind of let's start big and then zero in. From your time from everything, right, all of your experience collectively, what workforce challenges have been most persistent that you've seen just in your experience?
I think first and foremost, in terms of workforce challenges, it's been dealing with the steady state of structural turnover in public accounting and the acceptance of the structural level of turnover in public accounting. You know, it ebbs and it flows, and right now we're at a low point. And there will come a time again where, you know, turnover levels range from 20 to 40% at the senior associate level, and then retreat back down to the single digits again when economic times become tougher. So I think, you know, that's been the backdrop of most of the challenges facing the resource management function in public accounting firms. And I think in addition to that, it's really been the manifestation of the dog trying to catch his own tail in a lot of ways in terms of executing a sound resource management strategy across the practice. So for example, in my current role right now at McCosy as an advisory board member, and before that as CFO, you know, we would reach out to clients in the September, October timeframe, and sometimes as early as August, to really understand what their surge needs were for busy season, and their needs go far beyond surge needs during busy season. And you know, way too often, if not usually, the answer was, we don't really have busy season planned out yet, and that would leave folks like myself scratching their heads or pulling out what little hair is left, and trying to understand and wrap my head around the notion that you've got a several hundred person audit practice, or in certain cases thousands of people in the audit practice. You're 3 months away from your busiest time of year, and you don't know what your workforce needs look like. That's, you know, at some level astonishing to me, and that's presented, you know, a real challenge as well. And I'll say the third thing is, and then I'm probably going to cut to the chase with some answers to some questions down the road that I'm sure you have, Christine, is, you know, there's been a wild temptation among leadership across all of the firms to oversimplify the notion of resource management and such that, oh, we have a problem, let's just tweak up utilization, let's tweak up leverage, that'll solve all ills. And, you know, way too simplistic an approach to the resource management conundrum and the strategic imperative of getting it right.
I think, you know, right, our listeners are very much in the resource management space. We do have people from many different industries, but a lot of the resourcing challenges are industry agnostic. It has to do with planning. It has to do with lack of forecasting, some of which, you know, is in our control and some isn't. But that being said, I love this idea of this concept, right? You know, this is going to happen, and that yet year after year we're continuing to not be prepared. Now, I have my own perspective on that, but I'd love to hear yours. Why? So we know that it happens. Why does it happen? Why is it that everyone is so caught off guard? You know, every busy season, it's like, oh, we haven't gotten to that yet. What do you think that's about?
You know, just one man's opinion here, but I think it's the fundamental short-term focus of many of the firms, not all the firms, but many of the firms. And, you know, in some ways that's driving the PE revolution, the rest of the M&A evolution. affecting the firms. And it's that, and even invades some of the partner mindsets that I'm not going to be here 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. I am unwilling to make the investment in a sound resource management strategy that may or may not benefit me and my current cohort of partners. So I think it comes down to that short-term focus, and frankly, in our current environment, driving costs down to the lowest possible level with some level of blinders on when you encounter a firm that's essentially hell-bent on driving cost of delivery down to its lowest possible level, which, by the way, and I say this with all the passion I can muster, that is not the optimal level of cost, is not necessarily the lowest level of cost. You've got, client stakeholder interest at stake, you've got partner stakeholder interest at stake, you have outside stakeholder interests at issue here with respect to developing a well-rounded resource management strategy that is about far more than driving the cost of delivery down as close to zero as possible. And I think it's unfortunate from the outside looking in these days. You're seeing it manifest itself with, put this in quotes, the India solution, as one, piece of low-hanging fruit example, if you will. That's just the lowest of low-cost alternatives that I think, some firms, and erroneously so, are looking to as the cure to all of their ills, whether it be staffing shortages, whether it be the ever-increasing costs of luring and retaining experienced auditors in the profession. And now, most recently, again, the PE sponsors. Time will tell, what their true focus will be. But I think it's my guess, along with many others, that it's going to be as simple as driving costs as low as they can, driving, in their minds, driving value up as high as they can as a result of driving the costs down and exiting at a multiple that's acceptable to them.
You bring up a really good point, because it's interesting. And by the way, I agree, right? You've got these two sort of phenomenons at play. One is this deep, I'd call it, interest in driving costs down. But then at the same time, there is this short-term focus. And I think that perhaps as you're describing with the PE activity in the industry, maybe that will change, over time. But in my experience, I think certainly from a resource management perspective, that you hit the nail right on the head in terms of the short-term focus, because a lot of what ends up happening, and I've been in this seat, right, where it's, look, guys, we know busy season is coming. We know that we need to plan for this, or perhaps we're in busy season, but we have, a spring busy season, depending on, what industry, if it's healthcare, maybe you've got, fund to fund works in the asset management space, whatever it is. And is this annual cycle of almost not wanting to deal with it. And I get it, because it's hard and they're doing other things, but that short-term focus, in my experience, has led to a lot of issues down the line, because when you don't have that planning done, you don't take certain very basic things into account that really you could have, right? There are certain things that you can't plan for, right? You don't always know exactly what the attrition, would be. You'll have, unexpected turnover. But the reality is, a lot of times, I think with more mature practices, especially on the audit side, for example, you could look at something like historical attrition and make a very educated assumption, right, about what you're going to be looking at, for the next 18 months, for example. And what I have found is that we just don't always do it. We just don't always take the step. And sometimes there are leaders that are more willing to, and others that maybe are not. But that inconsistency is also problematic. It's one of those things. It's, what's that saying? It's like, this is a group project, and like we're being graded as a group here, right? And it's like, you might have certain parts, and that's, I think, something that I'd love to get your opinion on. This is, I actually believe, a resource management issue across the board, regardless of service line, industry. It's around having the ability to prepare, but then not actually doing the thing to be prepared. And then you're left in this bad spot. So I'm curious, from your perspective, with that in mind, is that a new thing? Is that something you've seen since day one? How have you seen that change over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I don't think it's new. And I'll put a little spin on the question you said. The reason why I don't think it's new is that a lot of firms and a lot of resource management personnel within the firms, not all, look at and try to remember your exact words. What does busy season look like, and what does the non-busy season look like in terms of our headcount needs? Okay, And that's one lens, and frankly, one minor lens in terms of resource management and making sure you have the right stockpile of professionals to service your existing and your prospective client base, depending on your level of firm growth. So, I used to have a saying for everything, and people would laugh at me. We call them Wayne-isms, and one of the Wayne-isms I have is, let's not confuse availability with suitability. And by that, I mean, resource management isn't about understanding how much availability you have versus the demand that the practice faces, short, medium, and long term. It is much more about, do we have the right people with the right skills, emphasis added, that are available at the right time to serve the right clients, emphasis added again, at the right price. So I've interspersed some resource management concepts there with some operational excellence concepts. Yep. And ultimately with the goal towards not only driving profitability of the upcoming season or post-busy season period, but again, you said in the opening intro, and it was a great intro, thank you for that, very complimentary. It's how do you create a long-term, sustainable, profitable, growth-oriented practice? And it's not about saying, oh, I've got to need, my busy season looks like I need 800 auditors, we have 650, how am I going to fill that 150 person gap? That is way too simplistic way to look at it. And that is one of the challenges that I think resource management has had ever since, as we used to say, Moby Dick was a little guppy or a little minnow. So that's why I said this is not a new phenomenon. This is an ongoing phenomenon.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I will say it's not surprising to hear that. Part of it, I think, is unfortunately, it's just human nature. It's like, this is the behavior that you see. That being said, how have you seen that handled well? So taking all that into account, certainly I imagine there's been instances where it has been handled well. Can you tell us about those?
Sure. And indulge me for a second, because I'll go through a chronology of the way I saw it evolve in the profession. I started, don't tell anybody, I started in 1987 as an intern with a small local firm, the real estate focus, graduated in 88, went to a big four firm for a short while, and spent the vast majority of my career at Grant Thornton in various partner roles. And I will tell you, even through my early stage as a partner at Grant Thornton, scheduling, which erroneously was always used interchangeably with resource management, not meant to sound offensive in any way to the resource management professionals, but that's what it was. Talk about resource management. Oh yeah, we have a scheduler. And that scheduler, and I'm going back as recently as the early 2000s, was typically an audit senior or a late manager with some Excel skills, scheduling the audit practice in Excel. And again, let me repeat that just so it sinks in for the younger people in the audience. You had an audit senior associate or a young audit manager scheduling the audit practice on an Excel spreadsheet. There's so many things wrong with that statement. Your head spins. Okay. So what happened was that I won't take personal credit for this, but one of the things, if only accidentally, I did that, looking back, was incredibly important long before the firm did it across the board, was probably in 2002 when I became audit practice leader. We had a woman, Jackie, who was our quote scheduler. We upskilled her, and I got her the manager title, and not just the manager title. She was empowered as a manager, which was unheard of. I mean, I got yelled at from every corner of the national office. How could you pay manager level salary to a scheduler? And as we all can attest, over the last 20 years in the profession, thankfully, that position, that role in the organization has done nothing but grow in terms of its prominence and its importance, not only in reality, but certainly the optics as well, and the level of resources that firms are putting into that function. So at the risk of being, overly negative, that is one hugely positive element of what's happened in resource management over the course of my career in public accounting. Now you have, chief people officers that have resource management under their auspices, or chief operating officers in some firms, depending on the structure, have resource management. So, I know I said a lot there, but resource management has come a long way from the days when a fifth-year person was scheduling the audit practice on an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, and sadly, I think that story would resonate with many, many people. And there's, again, you give these answers, and there's a lot. So we have to unpack a couple different things that you went into there. So one of the parts of that I think is really interesting is that for a long time, And in some situations, and I continue to see this today, that is still the case, where it's just not viewed as a strategic, really a function that's going to drive and execute on the strategy of the leadership's vision, right? For whatever that is, whether it's growth or talent development or employee engagement or really any of those things. And so it's this self-fulfilling prophecy where it's, if you're not going to treat it as a strategic, robust career, then you're probably not going to get very good things out of it, right? And so I think many firms, especially in the public accounting industry, have certainly recognized that. I think the Big Four has done that tremendously. For many, many years, that has been established, and the resource management teams and processes have been, I would say, to the point where they're a very, very well-oiled machine now in terms of forecasting and predicting, all kinds of either people and headcount related matters to really locking into what's in pipeline, which is great. But the other challenge there is still a very consistent, incorrect mindset around what a resource management process and function can really produce. So I think that's one area. The other thing that you said that was interesting, and I do want to dig into this because I'm imagining our listeners from a RM standpoint in that profession, one of the things that ends up happening a lot is the resource managers, regardless, right, of their level, they have a very unique vantage point that other people just don't have within the organization, right? Because they are, in many cases, overseeing, supporting a pool of people that is much larger than just one, let's say, practice area. And because of that, they're seeing all kinds of stuff that, is really interesting. I remember at one point I was leading a team and we had the resource managers for each area. They were popping into the performance calibration meetings because there were certain utilization, let's say, related items that would come up. And so they would take that into account. And one of the things that was really interesting and very much an unintended consequence of their attendance in those meetings was that the resource managers who were attending were not necessarily aligned to practices in the way that those calibration meetings were taking place. So what I mean by that is you might have had, let's say, an HR business partner who was overseeing all of, I'm making this up, the Mid-Atlantic, let's say, business unit, but the resource manager might have been supporting, insurance for many, many different, geographies. And so that resource manager would suddenly have this really interesting perspective on what all the insurance practices across the board were doing, regardless of geography. And what was really interesting about that is you would start to see in some cases, really big differences that were going on in terms of not just what the partners and the leaders were focused on, but in some cases, how they were measuring performance, whether that was expectations that, let's say, a manager should have, X number in terms of book of business or, this, that, and the other thing. And so my point in saying that is not to have a deep dive conversation about performance management, but it's more resource managers need to, in my opinion, learn how to take the perspectives that they have this opportunity to see and get these insights, but they need to do something to share that information so that they can not only elevate themselves in their own career, but actually, I would say, impact the way that resource management is viewed, certainly internally, but I would go so far as to say as a profession, full stop, because giving that little bit of emphasis is really important. So I'm going to ask you about that as well. So now I've said a bunch of things that need to be unpacked, but I guess in reaction to that, does that resonate with you? Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah. Again, I'd like to respond by way of example and storytelling. So bear with me for a second. You articulated the fact that, and it's true, resource managers have a unique level of visibility into what's going on in the practice, right? Unlike many other members of firm leadership. I don't think you understand how important it is. Let me just stress how important that is. Because again, one of the things that we stumbled into, albeit accidentally, was an experiment. I brought resource management into not only our conflict resolution meetings, meaning our scheduling conflicts, not our conflicts among people. God knows we had enough of those. Our we brought the resource management function in from the local level and the regional level in, so they can see what was happening in terms of the dynamics of the schedule, what jobs, the level of riskiness in an individual job, and what that required in terms of staffing and resource management, not just staffing, but resource management, more holistically. And then just as importantly, and this was not without its controversy also, I brought the resource management leadership team into our staff evaluation meetings at the end of the year, where we went through person by painstaking detail. Christine, I'm sure you've been part of this, where you go through the beauty and the warts of every single professional on your team, on your extended team as well. And the reason for that wasn't to create a spectator sport. And let me add one third thing. At times, I also invited resource management leadership into our partner meetings locally. I didn't have the power to do it regionally, but I did it locally. And the reason goes back to your word, visibility. Okay, I wanted to make sure the resource management function, understood our client base, the unique risks, problems, the great clients, the not so great clients, and the clients, frankly, that we probably shouldn't have, and know everything they could about that dynamic. Know this about the construct of what our professional cohort looked like in terms of who was the A player, who were the B players, who were the C players, who were the flight risks, who were the folks that were potential partners and leaders going into the future. And third, from the partnership meeting standpoint, made sure the resource managers, whether they sat in a C-level chair or were in middle management, so to speak, they understood what the firm strategy was, right down to our local office operating strategy was. So they can marry up those three principles, the resources that we have, the clients that we're serving, and the end game from a strategic standpoint, and have that. So they are fully armed with all the information they need from a resource management standpoint to, again, be in the best position to provide the right people at the right times with the right skills serving the right clients. And it's an incredibly complex puzzle, but without the information, without that visibility, and there's no memo, there's no cheat sheet, there's no shortcut to arming the resource management leadership and the folks occupying those leadership positions with that information, other than experiential. They have to be in those meetings. They have to be in the partner meetings. They have to be in the staff meetings. They have to be in the evaluation meetings. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I am fortunate to have had that type of access and exposure in my own career, which I'd love to say I was just amazing at resource management, right? But it's something I enjoyed. It's something that I liked, but I could not have possibly been effective in the role if I didn't have that lens, right, into the dynamics of those meetings and what was important at the time, what the firm was focused on. I mean, it was things like, a certain practice, let's say that I was supporting from an RM perspective, was looking to strategically expand their footprint into a new geography. But because I knew that, I was able to keep my eyes open for things that were happening there, right? So if there was an opportunity, let's say for another part of the firm to do some advisory work in that geography that we hadn't yet expanded to, I could look to put some of our professionals on that work to start getting them acclimated to the clients in that area, things like that. One example, but that's not something I ever would have even thought to do had I not sat at that meeting, right? And understood that that was something that, was part of the focus and part of the future. So I think that there's two offshoots to what we're talking about here. One is, and by the way, I agree with all of that. I'm a huge supporter, of course, in elevating the profession of resource management. There's this whole idea of resource managers don't always have that exposure, right? But if they do, that's not enough. They have to then have a perspective and do something with that information and, take their seat at the table and they don't just keep getting invited to the meeting, get invited to the meeting and then do something with the information. Present back to the managing partner what your suggestions are based on all of that. So that's one thing. But the other thing that I'm even more curious about, and I am certain I speak for anyone who's listening, how did you realize that? And now a word about our sponsors, Dayshape. Do you ever feel like your team spends more time managing spreadsheets than getting actual work done? If you're a strategic leader in a professional services firm, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Say goodbye to the chaos with Dayshape. Dayshape is an AI-powered platform that takes the stress out of resource management. Imagine scheduling, planning, and staffing all being handled in one smart system that actually understands your business. Sounds too good to be true? Believe me, I dreamt of having this type of technology when I was a resource management leader. It's like having a superpower for your firm, boosting productivity, profitability, and even employee happiness. Plus, it seamlessly integrates with your existing tools, so there's zero disruption. Do you want to see the magic in action? Check out dayshape.com and see how your resource management function can be elevated to a more strategic position. Trust me, your team and your CEO will thank you. In many situations, sadly, resource management is not viewed that way, right? You called it kind of that scheduling function, which to me is like nails on a chalkboard. But yes, right, that is what it is in some situations. I have always said that if leadership does not view resource management as strategic, it's because they don't understand. In my opinion, it's because they don't actually understand what resource management is. They don't truly understand what it consists of, right? And what it can do. So my question is, you made that pivot, right? You just described that. Was that because you decided to roll the dice? Did you see this working somewhere else? Like, what made you decide to do that?
Common sense.
I like that answer.
Which is not always present in many firms, in certain sub areas within the firms. There was nothing experiential about it other than the fact, when I was on the other side as a manager, and I would receive senior resources, and they didn't come with the right industry skills or specialization. They didn't come with the right experience level. They didn't come with the right communication skills, depending on how difficult the client was to work with or not, for that matter. So I think it was a product of being on the other side of the desk and being sort of the user of resource management services and leadership. Not that it jaded me in any way. Chuckle. But I guess I looked inward and said, when I become a leader, instead of complaining about it, let's do something about it. And I did want to add one other thing. We keep talking about this notion of being invited to the table or getting a seat at the table. And we've seen firms where resource management is highly valued, and we've seen firms where resource management is to this day not that highly valued. It's a two-way street. So what I would coach our resource management folks, and frankly any other internal client services folks, whether they were leaders or staff members, you have some level of responsibility to get your seat at the table.
Yes.
So, if you wait for an invitation, I tell my kids this all the time, you wait for an invitation, you're going to wait for you're never going to eat dinner if you wait for that dinner invitation. Again, maybe that's just me a little bit, there's a little bit of a dinosaur attitude creeping in there, or conditioning. But I will firmly believe that you do have to be assertive in professional services, or frankly, any commercial environment. And if you don't have that seat at the table, ask for it, demand it, justify it with data and concrete recommendations that will resonate with senior leadership. And by the way, even if you do all of those things and you're still shut out from getting a seat at the table, you better be damn sure to at least have a confidant and internal champion that is at that table, that is listening to you. So that's your fail-safe, your plan B. But, it's just incredibly important to A, be at that table, and B, if you're not at the table, to have somebody at the table that has your interests.
Yeah. No, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think it's part of what, in my opinion, is the issue is not just, so the first part is not being viewed, let's say, as strategic enough, not being given, let's say, access, right, to all the things that we described. And that is unfortunate. Sure. But the other thing is, in a lot of cases, I don't know, and it's interesting that you say, internal, just operational functions in general, because I agree. I think a lot of this is not just resource management. Resource management is one of the functions where I think this advice would hold, very true. But I think part of it is there usually isn't an outlined career path. Like, it's not like, okay, and then 2 years in, this will happen and you're expected to do these 3 things. And then 3 years later, this will happen and you're going to be exposed to these, other things. And so I think a lot of times people are left wondering or having to feel a little bit maybe isolated is the word that I'm looking for, in trying to figure that out. Or they're seeing things happen in other firms, and maybe they're watching, let's say, a Big Four operation, and meanwhile they're at a smaller accounting firm and they're like the lone wolf, trying to carve out this process. And so that's not to say that I don't get it. I do 100% get it. But I think that's where your advice comes even more to the forefront, right? Because the reality is that it's in the latter situation where you need that even more, where you really need to not just be, as you said, assertive, but it's really taking in, it's almost like that, give and take, right? It's, if you're invited to the meeting, do something to contribute to the meeting, something, anything, like get this perspective and use that truly as a learning opportunity so that the next time that you speak to a group of leaders, you can, for lack of a better word, right, like show your worth, right? And kind of explain, this is what I understand is happening. And here's how we can do something about that. And here's how I can directly contribute to that. So not to get on my soapbox, but I could not agree with that more.
No, 100%. It's not about getting invited to the meeting. It's about getting invited to the meeting and then adding the appropriate value.
I like that.
Jamie Dimon and Andy Jassy at Amazon. It just takes one little Google search or one little Apple News search. You'll find quotes from each of them about how to run an effective meeting, frankly, how to not have a meeting at all when meetings aren't necessary. And that's one of the pillars, frankly, what they both talk about is, they have very, very little. They have no patience, not very little. They have no patience for executives or middle management that show up in meetings, A, either unprepared or B, or unwilling to contribute in a meaningful way in those meetings.
I mean, it makes perfect sense. So yeah, that's the little tagline I just dreamed up. It's not about getting invited to the meeting. It's about getting invited to the meeting again. I think that is all super interesting. Pivoting slightly. So we talked about the strategic way that resource management can operate. We've also certainly talked about some of the areas, right, that they would touch. Let's talk more about the people part. So you've led groups of people, in various stages and in different types of roles. Certainly you have a good understanding of how resource management plays into that. Do you find that the resource management process supports that development and engagement? Do you think that the resource management process should be driving that? Like, what's your philosophy on that?
Yeah, I think obviously the answer is it depends. It's all over the map in terms of whether resource management, supports that. I would say in general, the answer is not enough. To be honest with you, and specific to public accounting, here's where I think resource management holds the cards for the next winning hand of professional services poker. Just came up with that analogy. I'm pretty proud about that.
It's a good one.
At some point, public accounting has to become smarter from a business acumen standpoint. And when I say it has to become smarter, it has to populate its ranks, client serving, internal client services, with smarter people. Not that they're not smart at all, but the definition of smart and talented and successful in the context of public accounting, unfortunately, has become about checking, and especially the larger firms. So I don't want to cast a broad brush here, but I will with respect to the larger firms. It's who checked the right box most frequently and most accurately and all of the time, because failure is not an option as it relates to checking the wrong box. And that's been an unfortunate unintended consequence of the regulatory oversight over the last 20 to 25 years since the financial misdeeds of the early 2000s started to come to the forefront. And again, you're seeing people make senior manager, managing director, partner, as the case may be, that have done they've done an okay job. They've checked the right boxes. So what's going to happen now, in my view, and where resource manager comes into play is, it starts at the top of the funnel in terms of the recruiting function, and that is, you can't continue to lose the best and brightest students to investment banking, law school, medical school. You got to attract really, really smart people at the top of the recruiting funnel. And then you got to, from a resource management standpoint, make sure that those folks, not coddle is not the right word, are recognized, and we are intentional about the experiences that they're given, the clients that they are working on, the ancillary skills, whether it be practice development, just their overall executive presence, presentation skills, leadership skills, so that those folks are developed so you have the next generation of leaders in the public accounting profession. And this does come back to resource management. And if you look at, there's two different schools of thought with respect to resource management. Again, I'll devolve into storytelling for a second, and just a one-liner. One of the lines that he was actually a boss of mine, still a friend of mine, he would say to me, and it would drive me bananas, and I couldn't disagree with this more. He would say, Wayne, you overvalue intelligence. Sometimes we need B and C players. And I said, we certainly do not need C players, and I will begrudgingly agree that in certain limited circumstances, we need B players. I said, we will ultimately lose the battle competitively against our competitors if we continue to say, how many people can we keep, as opposed to how many of the right people can we keep. So I think one of the things that resource management can do is to sort of tweak, if not fully shift the focus towards developing the superstars in our firm organizations. Okay, and I think that's been lost at some level in the firms of all sizes. Frankly, there was nothing more disappointing to a leader in an accounting firm, a leader that I think has their head screwed on right, than watching a superstar walk out the door, a future partner, a future leader, a future rainmaker. Because again, you got to break out of that short-term mindset. Whenever we lost superstars, and there were various reasons why. But every time a superstar walked out the door, my thoughts sort of transitioned to a stewardship mindset, and that was, what is the longer-term impact of that relative to paying our retirement benefits as partners, having succession, making sure that our client portfolio is protected long after some of the older, middle-aged or older partners leave the practice. And frankly, it goes to the long-term sustainability of the firm. Instead of being focused on 6,000 people in the audit practice across the country, yes, that's incredibly important. It's equally important to be focused on those 50 out of those 6,000 folks that are going to be the next generation of senior leaders in the firm, and make sure none of those 50, or if there's a few, one or two, it's limited to one or two that actually walk out the door, either to a competitor or leaving public accounting entirely. Yeah. And I think resource management has to get that. And the end game for that is, it goes back to my suspicion that the regulatory environment is going to ease a bit. At some point, the marketplace is going to demand, quote unquote, value from the audit exercise in and of itself. And I don't mean value in getting the 5-paragraph or what it used to be a 3-paragraph audit opinion. I don't know if it's 5 or 6, 7 paragraphs now, but that's not value as defined. Value is when your audit team walks out of the field work, but issues their audit opinion, and along with it has meaningful dialogue and conversations with not the CFO, the CEO, the COO, the board of directors, the audit committee of the board of directors, about value-added recommendations about how to run a better business from the client's standpoint. Okay, and it's not about a nebulous segregation of duties management comment that every auditor who's ever picked up a pencil has drafted, probably in almost every audit engagement they've completed. It's about meaningful insights about what your client is doing, what their competitive position is, what their level of operational excellence, or the opposite of that, operational sloppiness entails, and recommendations to drive the success of the client organization and demonstrate your value as a professional services provider. Because it's at some point in the future, and I think it's going to be before I depart this earth, clients are going to demand that, and not just the paragraphs within an audit opinion.
I love that. It's not only so spot on, but I love the idea that how you framed resource management can and really should have a key role in paving the way for that to be the case, right? I think that's I'm going to stop us there, because that's a really good high for us to take away for anyone who's listening. But I cannot let you go until we do our rapid fire wrap up. So I have 2 questions. The first is, would you be willing to share with us a rookie mistake that you made earlier in your career at some point and what it taught you?
Sure. It wasn't a rookie mistake insofar as rookie in the profession. It was a rookie as a partner and rookie as a leader. So spoken answer, not deflecting the question. I think it comes down to, I overvalued, in 2 instances, partners that managed a very large book of business, critically important to our practice. This is back when we managed the practice more locally from a geographic standpoint. Obviously, all the larger firms now are regional, if not national focus. But I had local P&L responsibility. And I looked at two growth-oriented partners who each carried, $4 million books of business in a strategically important industry vertical, both of whom were toxic to our people, clients, and other stakeholders. And I'll say it again, they were toxic to our people, clients, and other stakeholders. And I would go home at night and rack my brain and say, we just can't replace these folks. I understand, I comforted myself saying I understand the issue, but making a risk reward determination here. And we held on to these folks until the situation absolutely exploded, and there was out of my hands. So it sounds very simple, but the rookie lesson I learned was move on promptly, and don't underestimate the next cadre of folks that are ready to take the reins of responsibility. The senior managers underneath these two partners absolutely grabbed the reins when they were shown the door. And yeah, did it take them 6 months to get up to speed? Absolutely. Maybe a year and a half. But that was on me and my team. It was on me not pulling the plug earlier. That was a rookie mistake. And I will never, ever, ever forget that. And I may never directly go back into public accounting, but I would never make that mistake again. Not in my own business, not in the business that I had leadership responsibility.
Thank you for sharing that. I just honestly got goosebumps. That was really, really powerful. Thank you. Appreciate that perspective. And then the last question is, what is the best piece of career advice that you have ever received?
That's an easy one also. It was May 15th, 2000. It was the date of my partner interview in Chicago. And I've got a couple of memories. The first one is not germane to your question, but I'm going to add it for context setting purposes. I'm in the cab going down Jackson Street in Chicago, and I thought to myself, I really should have prepared for this interview. I went into my partner admission interview without an hour of preparation. So I was laughing at myself. I walked in, and it was actually the day that, again, for you youngsters out there, you're not going to remember this, but there was a Judge Jackson who deemed Microsoft to be an unlawful monopoly, and the fines levied to Microsoft was $1, but it was treble damage. So Microsoft had to pay a $3 fine to the Justice Department. Okay. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Getting to the best piece of business advice. So went through the interview, 3 hours long, big, long oak table set in a mahogany conference room, very, very imposing. Bunch of senior leaders around the table, probably 15 or 20. Got through the interview, notwithstanding the lack of preparation, and they had 45 seconds left. And they said, and whoever was chairing me says, "Is there anything you would like to ask anybody on the committee?" He was the most, and I did this intentionally. He was the most gruff interviewer around the table. He had the reputation of, pick the most curmudgeonly, stubborn, hard person to deal with. And I looked him in the eye and I said, I have a question in the 45 seconds. I said, what's the single biggest critical success factor for a new partner coming into this firm, in your opinion? And he looked at me without hesitation and he said, the most critical driver to success as a young partner, mid-career partner, or older partner is the partner that understands that this is a business, not a profession. And I will never, ever, ever forget that. Now, you can debate that. You can argue that. I tell that story not because it's emphatically right or correct, but the profundity, is that a word? Profoundness of that statement has sat with me for going on 25, 26 years, probably 25 years in May. It's the partner that understands that this is a business first and a profession second, or this is a business, not a profession.
Yeah, that is very powerful. It's definitely a mic drop moment. Thank you very much for sharing all of that with us.
Sure, my pleasure.
And with that, we'll wrap up our conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, help others discover our show. So follow, like, or subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Resource Revolution.